Yeah, okay, we'll be there about 10 minutes from now.
All the best. Assalamu alaikum.
Take care, bye.
Can't believe we're finally doing this, you know? It's gonna be really nice to go to these places. As I went there with Mum when I was little, but it'll be nice to go and see them now I really understand the significance of these sites.
Yeah, it's gonna be a totally new adventure for you.
So, where's our first stop then?
It is the Abdullah Quilliam Association in Liverpool. The guy I've just been speaking to is Mu'min Khan. He's the Chief Executive Officer there.
Yeah.
And the Abdullah Quilliam Association or Society is named after Abdullah Quilliam himself, who was also known as the Sheikh of the British Isles. Sheikh means like leader of the Muslims in the British Isles.
Great, can't wait.
Hello,
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Britain's first mosque. Good to see you after a long time. Assalamu alaikum, how are you?
Welcome. This is my niece Ruby's come along to learn all about your institute and what you've been up to over the last few years.
It's a delight to show you the first mosque and tell you more about Abdullah Quilliam and of course your great-great-grandfather, Robert Stanley.
Inshallah, God willing. Thank you.
Welcome. One of the things that Abdullah Quilliam did was he didn't alienate people. He says, you can't do this, you can't do this, you must do this. He didn't. So what historians have said is that people would be praying with their shoes on and he let them do how they pleased. But soon after they realized that shoe is dirty and they can't sit properly in the state of prayer.
Sure.
So they learnt in a hard way and they take their shoes off.
It reminds me as well of something else I've read about he actually had Christmas Day celebrations here in the mosque, right?
Absolutely. He actually opened the original masjid that he built, the purpose-built extension that he built on a 25th of December 1889 as the opening of the first mosque. And I asked the historian, why did he do that? Because, of course, we don't celebrate Christmas as a Muslim. But what he thought that we believe in Jesus Christ as the prophet of God. And in honor of Jesus Christ, he opened it for the people who celebrate Christmas. Because we have to remember, Steve, that those days, 1889, the family who were poor were extremely poor and they didn't have anything to eat on a Christmas day. So in honor of Jesus Christ, he opened it for them to have celebrate their own religion.
It sounds like an extremely kind, but also very wise, and you know he understands his culture, his people. You know, there'll be people who are learning about these early Muslims for the first time here in Great Britain. Many of them will not be Muslims. Many of them will be citizens of the United Kingdom, and they may be asking themselves, they're a small community, why would we be interested in this?
I think what's the pride of the British people who are not Muslim is to say, here is Britain's first mosque, established by an Englishman on an English soil. At the time when Britain was ruling half the world, you have to think about that. And here is the man who had the courage to literally build a purpose-built prayer room as a masjid and open it on a Christmas day in 1889, 135 years ago of today. I'll take you to the printing room now.
Thank you. Oh.
Wow.
Right. Have you seen one of these before?
No.
Amazing.
I've seen them in the movies.
Yes. Now, Abdullah Quilliam used to do 3 sets of printing: a weekly magazine or newsletters, a monthly newsletter, and a quarterly. And the quarterly one would go to over 32 different countries across the globe. And they would use, probably had few of these to print it. And they'll be using those single metal letters to create a template. They'll push it onto here, and then they'll ink it up, and then they'll bash it.
Well, one of the things we were talking about only the other day is our ancestor, Robert Rashid. He used to write regularly to the Crescent, Al-Hilal, and it was a kind of a form of correspondence between the different people who are Muslims or those who were interested in what was going on here in Liverpool and the Muslim community. And
in Quilliam times, people who are bricklayers, plumbers, ordinary people, as well as professional people who became Muslim under his wing. Over 650 people took Shahada, embraced Islam.
Rolling.
Mark, and it's taking a burp. 1, take 1. Thank you.
Yeah, can we remove the glasses or
Yes.
there's a lot of reflections?
Liverpool was a divided city in the late 19th and early 20th century. So you had a division between Irish Catholics who tended to be sequestered into certain low-paying or low-status jobs like dock work. In that time, there was what you might call hate preaching. There was street violence and tension between Protestants and Catholics.
Quilliam grows up really a devout Christian, but seeing these tensions, seeing people fighting with each other, even physically sometimes. And so he sees Christianity as somehow has lost its way. It's become divided into lots of sects and different movements. So he begins to challenge that. And he feels that Christianity doesn't do enough to correct that, to bring about the equality that he feels it should have had if it was the true faith of God.
He was also a solicitor and he worked in Liverpool. He was somebody who was very aware of these injustices in society, the inequalities. A lot of his work was around divorces and often he supported women. Throughout those early days, you see that sense of responsibility to society.
When we bought the restorer, he says, Mumin, it's not a cooking pot, it's the washing machine of its time. So the housemaid or the servant, they will boil the linen onto this. So now I'm going to take you to the mosque which he built, and I'm going to tell you how they pray, how your grandfather, Robert Stanley, would be sitting with Abdullah Quilliam and praying. Let's go and show you now. We'll take a sit.
Okay.
Okay, lovely. The mosque was built from that window ledge to here. So this would have been like a back garden of number 8 Brom Terrace. Okay, so here we have, as you can see here, so we would be sitting in that platform. Okay, there's Abdullah Quilliam in the Turkish clothing. He would always wear Moroccan or Turkish because of his link with the Turkey and Morocco. In the middle, you have Rashid Stanley sitting with him, wearing the fez hat. Robert Stanley, known as Rashid Stanley, was a great friend of Abdullah Quilliam, and I think he converted to Islam when he was 69 years old, as you were saying. And he was the vice president of the Liverpool Muslim Institute. And he wanted to pass the baton onto Rashid Stanley, but he said, look, I'm 72 years old, I'm too old to run the organizations, pass it to someone else.
Every time we see this picture is when we look at our great-grandfather in the picture, it's like looking at my father. It's the
Absolute,
absolute,
yeah.
as we say, spitting image of my own father, who's still with us, thank goodness. And of course, in that picture, there's literally this platform just here.
Yes.
So he's literally, it's rare that you get an opportunity to stand in the same spot of an ancestor that goes back so many generations.
Quilliam had his own particular ideas about what represented acceptability in his social life. He was a bigamist even before he became a Muslim. And he had two wives, one an official legal wife, and the other a lady who might be described as someone he was having an affair with, but he had children with her. So he had strong views even before becoming a Muslim about things like polygamy. He didn't have a problem with it.
Quilliam was a workaholic, and it's not surprising because he was supporting two families. His doctor told him he had to take a rest cure. That meant go take a holiday to recover. He loved geology. He'd won a national prize in geology, so he goes to Morocco in 1883 to study the rocks as a geologist. When he gets there, he says, why don't I just go to Gibraltar? It's only just across the straits. He does. He meets a party of Hajis. They explain Islam to him. He talks to other Muslims there. And he says, look, I don't want to make a quick decision. I want to go back and study for myself.
He speaks of a meeting that took place in a restaurant between himself, a Jewish person, and a Muslim person, three men. He doesn't say who they were, but he says that over the course of that meal, they decide that each one of them will defend their religion. And he decides at the end of that the Muslim view is the one that made the most sense to him. And whether he took formally a shahada then at that time, we don't know because he doesn't say. But when he comes back to Britain, to Liverpool, he announces that he's converted to Islam, and he announces it publicly in the newspapers.
Alaikum
salam, welcome.
Lovely to meet you.
Good to see you. Yes, good to see you here.
This is Ruby, my niece.
Hi, Ruby. Hi, welcome. Cambridge Central Mosque.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
We're really looking forward to seeing it inside.
Yeah. Have you not been here before?
It's my first time.
First
Literally,
time?
yeah,
Oh,
absolutely,
right.
yeah.
So
I've
it's
seen lots
exciting
of
for the
lovely
first
pictures
time.
of it.
One of the interesting things about the early community, as you can see it in their quite sort of prolific publications and in Quilliam's own writings, and I think in Rashid Stanley's own lifestyle, is that in a rather paradoxical way, seemingly, they experienced their transition to Islam as something that was in continuity with what they already believed in. And I think Quilliam was quite far-sighted in his sense of where he was culturally. And this accounts for the remarkable success of his dawah, of his mission, in the still very staunchly kind of Christian and in many ways colonially xenophobic England of the time, was the way in which he presented Islam as a reasonable, and in fact the most reasonable, religious option for educated and conscientious English men and women.
About the first decade of existence, there were several violent incidents. Windows were regularly broken glass was put into the prayer hall. How they would handle it was that they would call the services of the police, they would not resist violently, and the focus was on building good relations with the community through the social services that they did, supporting the rights of the poor in the court, as Quilliam did in his practice as a solicitor. So over a long period, they built a kind of good reputation in the city, and the attacks died down at, you know, I'd say the second decade of the community's existence. There were far fewer attacks. So they played a sort of long game.
Back then, everybody knew what it was to be British and even to be from a particular town. And in Liverpool, there were even different dialects for different areas of Liverpool, and people were absolutely rooted in, say, a working class community around a particular pub, around a particular church. They had their own songs. Working class communities were kind of very proud of their identity, very autonomous. We lived in a triangle of streets. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody was watching everybody's children. So it was quite hard when people already had such a strong sense of their groundedness in the world to suggest, well, why don't you come and do something that's actually a bit different, to put a mosque there instead of the chapel, even though he tried to, as it were, chapelize his mosque as much as he could within the boundaries of what the religion would allow. So I think back then, calling people from Victorian England in its pride and its heyday to the religion that was still perceived as being one of the religions of the subject races, even though Islam was the majority religion of the British Empire, was psychically a lot more difficult for people than it has become today.
You know, the Liverpool Muslim Institute is really flourishing. You know, the community is growing, people are converting. Every other week there are a few more names added. Quilliam is well known as the Sheikh al-Islam of the British Isles. And again, he is known worldwide. The weekly newsletter is being circulated across Britain, but also across Europe and the Middle East and India. So it's a really flourishing community.
Quilliam always promoted himself and his Muslim community as loyal British subjects. Spoke about Queen Victoria as the ruler, not just of a very large Christian population, but I don't know what the figure was. He talked sometimes about 109 million Muslims were in the British Empire. So he saw the Queen as a ruler of Muslims, and she seemed to, or at least the state, at some level seemed to accept him as being the official leader of British Muslims.
Abdullah Quilliam had a great connection with Queen Victoria of that time. And Queen Victoria would say he was a prolific writer. So he's written lots of books. And he would say, make sure I get the 8 to 10 copies of the book, The Faith of Islam, for her children and grandchildren to read. So the first copy would go to Queen Victoria and then to the rest of the world.
There's a wonderful story which he tells of the first Indian regiments, of which many of the soldiers would have been Muslims, coming across to Liverpool, because Liverpool was the main port of entry from India. And they're also invited to come to St. George's Hall in Liverpool, in one of the great buildings of the Victorian era. And Quilliam is invited as a prominent citizen of the city, but also as the leader of the Muslim community. So when he enters the building, and the troops know who he is, they all come to their feet in honor of him, and they shout, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. This is the time of empire, when many Muslims felt that their own faith was in decline through the rise of the European empires. So therefore, Quilliam becomes a kind of an iconic figure, really, someone who's actually in the middle of Britain, doing the opposite, to the Christian missionaries in, say, India. He's actually bringing Islam to Britain. We also know that he conducted a funeral of a soldier from India who was in the parade And Quilliam is officially invited to conduct his funeral, and he does the funeral at Woking Military Cemetery.
There would be many people that would do a number of talks, lectures here in Liverpool, as well as in Birkenhead. And in Birkenhead, when he was giving a talk among hundreds of people, there was a young girl, about your age, Ruby, 19, when you said, she came to him and said to Quilliam, I want to become a Muslim. And he says, oh, wait a minute, hold on, And he gave her the Quran to read. So eventually she did become Muslim, Fatima Elizabeth Cates, a very dedicated lady. And she was the first English convert female to become a Muslim on an English soil. I think it's a tribute to British history overall, and to the Muslims and non-Muslims. And this is the birthplace of Islam in Britain.
Quilliam leaves Liverpool in May 1908, and the ostensive reason is that he is going to be struck off as a solicitor for falsifying evidence in a divorce case, but he knew that this was already in the works. Now, we don't know the exact reason why he left Liverpool, but one thing I would say is that according to the account in the Crescent, Quilliam was subsidizing the costs of running the mosques and all of its activities to the tune of about 2/3 of the cost. So if he could no longer practice as a lawyer, it meant that he could no longer financially support the activities of the mosque and the community that was attached to it. That might give another reason why he decided to leave.
Abdullah Quilliam, when he left the country in 1908, he did not come back for a good few years. He spent his time in Africa, particularly in Nigeria. It's believed that he was one of the very first one to sort of preach Islam in Japan as well. And there is some crescent written about Japan's experience. And also he lived in France.
The institute completely collapsed. There was no proper succession. Bilal was obviously not interested in continuing the institute or leading it as a religious figure. Robert Ahmed, Quilliam's oldest son, also didn't step up to lead the community.
The house gets sold. He sells the house. And it has a very different story then. It becomes, eventually the council end up with it. And it becomes the registrar of births, deaths and marriages in Liverpool.
Some members of the community leave Liverpool and they move abroad, or they become connected with the Woking Muslim mission that is set up in and around 1913. One of the imams from Woking went to Liverpool after the institute closed and said he found only 3 practicing Muslim families, one of which was the family of Abdullah Quilliam. So really it is a sad story, no doubt.
So it's really the end of the Liverpool Muslim community, really, until it's reopened by the Abdullah Quilliam Society, in the 20th century. There were, of course, upheavals going on in Turkey while he was there with the Young Turk revolution against the Sultan. We suspect, we haven't yet proved, before Quilliam returns to Britain, he actually goes to Salonika. Now, Salonika was where the Sultan was exiled. So whether he goes to spend time with him in exile, but he eventually returns to the UK, possibly not just because the political situation is getting very difficult, but also because his first wife is dying of cancer in Birkenhead, and she does in fact die. Quilliam then marries officially his second wife, and eventually he moves to London, where he recreates himself with the name Henri de Lyon. And he becomes a part of the London community, which is beginning to develop around, particularly after the arrival of Kamaluddin, around Woking Mosque.
and he was praying there as a general member like you and I would pray. And he died 28th of April 1932. And he's buried in Brookwood Cemetery in Woking. There is no gravestone of Abdullah Quilliam in the Woking Cemetery at the moment, but the historians are trying to figure out which grave was his. There are a few which is unmarked.
People today want to turn Abdullah Quilliam into a hero, but my assessment, looking at all the historical evidence by his friends and his detractors, is that he was a lovable rogue with a heart of gold. He was a clever man, and he was well able to bend the rules when it suited him, maybe sometimes break the rules even. So we need to take Abdullah Quilliam as he was, warts and all.
Well, I hope you had a pleasant tour of the mosque.
Very
It's
much
been a
so.
pleasure meeting
Thank
you and
so,
talking
so
to you.
much.
Thank you.
And good luck with it in the future.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Assalamu alaikum.
Bye, go.
Assalamu alaikum. Take care.
So, what do you make of that, Ruby?
It was really interesting. I mean, you know, especially learning about Quilliam. He's such a fascinating character. But, you know, I feel like there's a few pieces missing to the story. We could have done a bit deeper dive, you know?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think you're talking about Quilliam's relationships, his marriages.
Yeah. Especially that Fatima Cates lady. I feel like she's got an interesting story we could find out about.
I think you're probably right. Why don't we call it quits for today? But maybe in preparation for tomorrow, have a look at that book down there in my book bag.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think you'll find something of interest.
Fatima of Liverpool, that one?
I think that's the person you're talking about.
Let's have a look. Yeah, great.